Whisper it, Camilla. And we'll be coming back to that phrase later in this podcast. We are halfway through the campaign. So time for our second deep dive into the seats that matter. The poll numbers to watch. Has anything changed? Yes, it has. With our resident experts, Dom, Penna and Ben Butcher. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us again.
Welcome. Now we'll also be discussing whether all Gen Zs sound like this.
Today they got offering change, but it's the same old Tory policy. We need better.
We gave up on being a party in protest 5 years ago. We want to get...
That was the young woman who disrupted Labour's Manifesto launch. Young voters might be passionate, but a lot of them are about to become MPs. Are they ready, Kamal?
We will find out. And, of course, it's football time. We'll be introducing our brand new Euros 2024 man in tight shorts. That's Tom Gibbs, senior sports writer, who has just packed his bags for Dusseldorf.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey.
And me, Kamal Ahmed.
Kamal, let's have a look at the polling. It's very exciting. We've reached the crossover moment. Dun, dun, dun. We have Reform now 1 point ahead of the Conservatives.
In one poll, just to be clear.
OK, according to YouGov.
Yes.
And we actually see the vote share for Labour going down. Lib Dems are maintaining a degree of supremacy on the yellow wing, if we can use a football analogy. Ed Davey, not quite up front, but on the bench.
Camilla, should we just use endless football puns this whole podcast? See how many we can get in.
OK, we'll try.
See how many we can score.
OK, back of the net. And so I think this is interesting, isn't it? We are at this seminal moment. And I suppose, Kamal, the point I'm making in my column, which I've just written, which is in tomorrow's paper and online later, is that it's all very well Nigel Farage saying that he's the effective opposition, but he isn't, is he? Because although he might end up on a vote share beginning with 2 rather than 1, which would be a great result for Reform, he's not going to beat Labour. He's going to beat the Conservatives into a pulp. But the point of my column is, what do we then end up with? And what we had from the Labour Manifesto was a document that actually posed more questions than it answers, because we don't really know what Labour's plan is. They're being handed this supermajority on a plate on the basis of a lower vote share, based on probably lower turnout, with nothing much to say about anything in a concrete sense.
As we said in the podcast before, if Reform find themselves on July the 4th with a vote share that starts with a 2, that's significant victory for Reform. If Labour on July the 4th start with a vote share which doesn't have a 4 in front of it but has a 3, i.e. below 40%, that's an issue that could be really negative for Labour, because they would have possibly this huge majority but only have been voted on by less than 40% of the people who turned out. And on the turnout issue...
Before you say that, I was just going to say, should we just put vote share into context? Because Boris Johnson won in 2019 on the basis of a 44% vote share, which was the highest since 1979. And in 1997, Tony Blair won on the basis of a 43% vote share. So what we're talking about is a supermajority with more seats for Keir Starmer, but less public support.
And if we look at turnout, and turnout has been drifting. If you look at 1992, it was nearly 80%. The last 3 elections are between 66% and 68%. So turnout has been generally drifting down, with some blips in a more positive direction. So if you have turnout around about 70%, and people think the deal is already done, that turnout could be depressed. So depressed turnout and less than 40%, that does raise us some significant issues.
Let's bring our resident stattos into the conversation, if you don't mind me calling you that, chaps, Ben and Dom. Dom, give us the polling picture overall as we reach this halfway stage.
So last night, Thursday night, we had the most extraordinary poll of the campaign so far, and with the caveat that it is just one poll. But a YouGov survey shows Reform now on 19%, in front of the Conservatives for the first time ever. The Tories on 18%, Labour way out on 38%. So again, no sort of questions about the size of Sir Keir Starmer's lead, but the crossover moment that Tory strategists and MPs had feared the whole campaign, and by calling a summer snap election, Rishi Sunak thought he could wrong foot Nigel Farage, thought that he'd still be out of the picture. Farage changed his mind, came back, and now, at least according to this one poll, Reform is now more popular than the Conservatives.
And for the Liberal Democrats, there seems to be some strength in their polling. So two questions come out of that, Dom. Are the Liberal Democrats the ones that are meaning there is a slight depression in the amount of support for Labour? Or is there any evidence that some Labour support is leaching to Reform? Or is that mostly a Labour-Lib Dem battle?
So it would appear that on the strength of these first 3 weeks, where Labour has shed support, it has been to the Lib Dems off the back of Ed Davey running a very energetic campaign, throwing himself into the sea, etc., doing obstacle courses, basically treating it like Centre Parks with half the lobby following him around. And with the Liberal Democrats, they are picking up support, presumably off the back of that, but also their manifesto has more promises. It has more of a vision than a Labour manifesto that had no new policies at all. We basically knew, based on what Labour had already promised, what would be in there. There is a risk that the more support for Reform grows and the more Nigel Farage's profile grows and the more the profile of his party grows, that eventually, as Sir John Curtis, sort of the god of polling this morning, was warning, that eventually that could end up seeing Reform start to hurt Labour as well as the Conservatives, particularly those who had planned to go back to Labour, having experimented with the Tories in 2019, been disappointed, would have almost gone back to Labour by default. But now that Nigel Farage, as he is so good at doing, has come along and disrupted the political scene, there is every chance that what he's saying about immigration, what he's saying about tax and the economy and net zero chimes with those traditional Labour voters. So Sir Keir Starmer doesn't need to be looking over his shoulder just yet, but there is a real risk that, especially if he's in government and Nigel Farage is a prominent voice in opposition, you could have that Labour to Reform switch.
But Ben, what does the data say about where Reform might top out? Because we've got Farage today, he's given a press conference, he said, I should be able to debate Keir Starmer one-on-one because I'm the effective opposition. Is that credible? I mean, where are Reform going to end up and how many seats are they actually likely to win?
To pour a little bit of cold water over that one poll, as you mentioned, YouGov has been, the pollster has kind of given Reform a little bit more of a boost over other pollsters. So just before I came on, I pulled out the average of the polls from the last week, the big pollsters that we put into our poll tracker online. And we have Reform around on about 14% to Conservatives 22%. So I think it's important to say it is one poll. Every single pollster follows different methodologies. So to say they're kind of at that point of the official crossover, there's probably a little bit of work to do. But there has been, since the start of the election, a decline in that Conservative vote and an increase in the Reform vote by about 3 to 4 points, depending on the different kind of pollsters. So they're certainly catching up and they're certainly moving towards them. But unfortunately, this electoral system we have doesn't in any way promote or give any heedance to the popular support nationally. But unfortunately for Nigel Farage, the first past the post system that we have in this country doesn't give prominence to parties who do well nationally. It gives it to those who do well in targeted and localised areas and with localised groups. That's why, based on the last constituency level MRP polling that we saw, Liberal Democrats were getting about 11% of the country and are getting 48%, 48 seats across the whole of the country. So they are doing very well uniformly, Reform, across all seats. But the Liberal Democrats are really targeting these specific areas, and that's where they're going to pick up. So we looked at the numbers a couple of days ago just to have an idea of how many more points the Reform Party would need to steal from the Conservatives across every single seat to start picking up a lot of seats. And it was around 10 points. If they increased their votes by 10 points in every single seat and they were taking it from the Conservatives, that crossover point doesn't happen for a long time because they are so far behind, even in the seats where they're second place. There's no seat where they're within 15 points of first place. So it's something to think about. He is probably going to win Clacton, but I think that is to do with his personal appeal to that area. But I think nationally...
Nigel Farage,
yeah. But I think nationally we've got to be pretty careful with having this idea of them being opposition in Parliament or being anything. I think they will be doing what they did in 2015 with UKIP, where they won about 14% of the vote, one MP. So it's extraordinary. It is all coming. We know that a lot of it's coming from the Conservatives, but it is a situation whereby, this system tends to benefit those who are.
So we need to watch. We need to watch, Ben, from what you're saying, if there is real momentum here, whether there is that increase, as you're saying, Camilla. We've had one poll with crossover. We need more of those. And is it continuing on an upward trajectory? Clacton, you say, is their biggest chance, of course, because Mr. Farage is there. Are there 2 or 3 other seats? Boston and Skegness is Richard Tice, I think is he now the president of
party chairman
of Reform, and obviously has some public profile as well. Are there any others beyond those 2 where we should watch at least on the evening to see whether, hang on, Reform are actually getting something significant?
I'm thinking Lee Anderson, but
this is Ashfield.
Ashfield.
I mean, I'll be looking on the night at the places where they're polling fairly well. I'm talking above 20% of the votes. And from the YouGov poll, which was done about a month ago, not the latest one they did, they had 28 seats where they were scoring over 20 points in the in those individual constituencies. They were the places where you might expect. They were the Great Yarmouths. It was the South Fannets, these seaside coastal towns with high levels of deprivation where Reform do traditionally well. I'll be watching all of those seats because I think that's one thing that we haven't been able to capture quite yet in the polls is how much momentum they're getting in specific areas versus the country as a whole. We will probably have another of those big constituency level MRPs very soon. I think it will be really fascinating reading.
Well, let's make sure we get you back for that.
Kamal, do you think Labour are worried about concerns that are starting to creep in about the lack of mandate for this supermajority? I say that because I'm reminded a little bit of people saying that the referendum result wasn't representative and didn't justify a hard Brexit because it was only 52 to 48. And then if you've got a Labour Party with an under 40% vote share, then people are going to start questioning whether they've got the mandate to have this all-powerful, all-seeing Labour government that consigns conservatism to the sidelines, potentially for the next 10 years.
I don't think they're concerned about it from the people I've spoken to regularly over the past couple of weeks. It's, of course, only very recently been an attack line from the Conservatives, so they're probably working out how should they consider this. What they are worried about is people not turning out because they think Labour's won. That's their biggest worry. It doesn't mean, though, to your point, Camilla, that they shouldn't be worried. And I think that we know that public trust in politics is very low. Public trust in the governing classes is very low. And if there is this idea, particularly if it is more marginalised economically communities that vote heavily for Reform and against Labour, and Labour win huge, I think didn't you say yesterday, Camilla, or the day before, that you have this sense of the Brexit referendum, this idea of the left behind, the ignored.
Yes.
Labour would be, it would not be sensible for Labour to ignore that mood. Yeah. So I don't think they're taking it seriously yet, and I think they should do. I actually asked the Shadow Climate Secretary, Ed Miliband, this very question at Labour's Manifesto launch in Manchester yesterday.
I mean, I think this is more a sign of a Tory campaign that is flailing around. They've stopped talking about what they have to offer the country, and they've almost admitting defeat. We are focusing not on what the opinion polls might say. We are focusing on, in the 3 weeks remaining, earning every single vote we can with our plan to change the country.
I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he? It's a weird attack line in a way from the Conservatives, because I think the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, dropped the ball there by admitting really that they're no longer looking to win, they're only looking to try and mitigate against huge defeat. So it's odd. I mean, what is the data saying, Dom and Ben, about this supermajority and what it might mean?
Well, it was actually a bit more than just Grant Shapps sitting on the sofa and saying it. It was actually a targeted advert which they've been putting out online saying that their predictions, or one number that they pulled out, is that Conservatives will drop to as few as 57 seats. We looked for that exact poll to find out where that was coming from. We couldn't find it. I think the best estimates of this supermajority will have Conservatives dropping to about 100 seats, or as low as 71 according to Survation, one that went out last week. So that is a massive majority territory for Labour. That is 487 out of 650 seats potentially. So it is something which the polls are starting to show. We're going to go to the worst ever Conservative position in recent history. So it's very likely to happen. I think that tactic that they're doing about getting that message out that we're heading towards supermajority does have an element of worth to it, because we know there's been polling which is done to Reform voters about their view on a supermajority. The vast majority are scared of Labour getting a majority for that long. So that might be enough to start swinging those votes back, even if it's not for the best reasons.
Don, what are Tory MPs telling you on the ground? Because, I mean, I'm just increasingly hearing sort of forecasts of doom. And it must be very difficult to be on the doorstep right now.
Of course, and Tory MPs I'm speaking to fall into two camps. The first are sort of the optimists who say, well, I don't believe the polls, sort of putting their fingers in their ears a bit. They are saying that maybe because of their strength as a local MP, or because people don't like Labour in their area, or because they will, based on their doorstep conversations, think that they will keep their seat. They think that the polls are obviously bad, but not quite that bad. They don't buy this wipeout scenario. The second group of Tory MPs is frankly furious by one, Rishi Sunak's decision to call a snap election, and two, the amount of gaffes in the campaign so far. And by calling a snap election that so few people seem to know about, Tory MPs are starting to wonder, was there any plan for this? That attempt to blindside Nigel Farage and Reform has gone badly, badly wrong, with Farage deciding to change his mind and return to the fray. And there are Tory MPs who fear that there is not going to be that much of the Tory party left.
One thing we haven't actually mentioned, which we should do, is that the turning the corner narrative was slightly undermined by the most recent Office for National Statistics figure, which said there was no growth in the UK economy in April. And it's surprising how little we've heard of that since that number came out. Rishi Sunak must have been praying for the statisticians at the ONS to give him some good news about the economy, because he could have then front-loaded that and redone the message.
Or indeed some positive news about the waiting list in the NHS.
Yes,
which
that was also bad again. Yeah.
Jumped up again after 7 months of decline, right in the middle of the campaign.
Although I did notice something which maybe speaks to the mood of the changing directions that different political parties are going in. Because in the last seven-way leaders debate, the first one was all about 6 politicians against Penny Mordaunt representing the failing Tory government. The most recent one was more about attacking Angela Rayner, because the likes of Stephen Flynn of the SNP and Daisy Cooper of the Liberal Democrats and Carla Denyer of the Greens have realised that it's better to attack Labour because the Conservatives are finished, they've been consigned to the scrap heap. Therefore, it's better to try and nick these votes back on the left from Labour than even go about this rhetoric around, you know, criticising what's gone before.
Yeah, the focus will certainly turn onto Labour. Can we just talk about Scotland a little bit, Dom? Obviously, the number of seats that Labour get in Scotland won't be a deal maker for the election, because Scotland just doesn't have enough seats. But it still will be significant. How are the SNP faring in north of the border?
Well, all of the projections are suggesting that the SNP, again, having not too dissimilar to the Conservatives, having been in power in Scotland for a very long time, just as the Tories have been in power in England for a very long time, and the fall of Nicola Sturgeon, who many SNP MPs sort of saw as, just as Boris Johnson was almost the glue that held the Tory party together, this charismatic leader who had sort of large public support. The same was true of Nicola Sturgeon. Then Humza Yousaf lasted little longer than Liz Truss, and both of their leaderships were hit by scandal and hit by backlash. Now, John Swinney has just a few weeks, having only been in power a few weeks when Sunak called the election to try and pull things back. And the most recent YouGov poll shows that the SNP could fall to just 27 seats, which is under half of what they've got at the moment. Labour could gain, even the Conservatives could defy their national performance to pick up a few seats. As we discussed last week, the Liberal Democrats could also be on course to gain a bit more of a foothold in Scotland. So this election has come at a very bad time for the SNP, and I guess the only hope for Swinney is that there is a backlash among those SNP voters who regard Labour either as too centrist or too opposed to independence. But for Sir Keir Starmer, and he is saying this at every campaign event he makes in Scotland, Labour's path for power will be made so much easier if Scotland does decide to give Labour another chance. So the SNP has it all to do and not very long to do it in.
Ben, what seats should we look at to think to ourselves on the night, wow, Labour are really going to win big tonight?
I think an interesting place to start that is just looking at where Keir Starmer is visiting, because he's visiting seats where he needs extraordinary swings to win. And by visiting, you kind of make the assumption that he thinks he might be able to actually win it. One of them is Mid Derbyshire, where he's going to need a 15.5% swing in order to take that back. Gillingham and Rainham as well. These are the kind of seats which have been Tory for really as long as we can remember in terms of the last kind of 5 or 6 elections. So they're very much target areas. I think the threshold that Starmer is setting in terms of what he expects to win the night is incredibly high. And up until last week, when we did our analysis on this, he hadn't visited a single Labour seat. That just shows the level of confidence that I think he has at the moment.
Wowzers. Dom saying there that Boris Johnson used to be the glue that held the Conservatives together is a bit nuts. I mean, they dumped him on the basis that he was 4 points behind Starmer. And now he's recorded this video in favour of Simon Clarke, his former Conservative colleague, who, by the way, is one of the only people in the party to have publicly eviscerated Rishi Sunak. Some months ago, he said this is all going completely in the wrong direction. He's been vindicated. So Boris there is rubbing his hands together with glee. And I'm interested, Kamal, because you're still getting a bit of feedback to your column.
Feedback is a polite way of putting it,
Feedback
yes.
to your column, where you suggested that what the Tories needed, the person that needs to unite the right, needs to be a Liberal more like Johnson than somebody divisive like Nigel Farage. So we just pick up on one letter to the editor here.
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy this bit,
Yes.
I think, Camilla, aren't I?
Sir, Kamal Ahmed trots out the mantra that elections are won only from the centre. There's another political term that has much more resonance, clear blue water. He basically goes on to cite all of the reasons why you're wrong and then concludes the remnants of the Conservative Party in July should ignore Mr Ahmed's advice.
Well, I hope that Mr Ogilvie may be willing to come on and let's have a chat about that. I just simply believe that parties that want to win elections have to have more than one core vote. They have to be able to talk to people who wouldn't necessarily vote for them rather than people who just would necessarily vote for them. So, Mr Ogilvie, the invitation is there. It would be lovely to have a chat about your robust response to my column, which I still stand by. But Camilla, we all struggle with columns at times in terms of the reaction. Camilla, I need to come back to one that you've actually mentioned a few times, which is the column which was headlined "Whisper It," but Rishi Sunak could just be about to roar back
It was Whisper It.
polls.
Rishi Sunak could be on the brink of an extraordinary comeback.
That was it, Camilla. Just the full horror of that headline.
I don't write the headlines.
Okay.
And it was just about the first week. I thought he had a good first week.
And it was a good
That's all
first
I'm
week. As we
saying.
said on the podcast, it was a
And
good
it was
first
before
week.
D-Day and it
But
was
just a few
before
comments.
Farage. Can I just clarify?
Just a few comments on that great column. Camilla is in full Comical Alley mode with this delusional piece. Comical Alley, of course, being the head of communications in Iraq just before the tanks rolled in from the Americans and the Allied forces. Andrew Scull has written, "Is this satire?" under your column. And also Marty Go, which is very good of you, Camilla, to give us all a bit of a giggle, which is I read this every morning. It sets the day up with a laugh and just gets funnier and funnier. So
He adds Whisper It, LMFAO, which I think stands for Laugh My Something Arse Off. Can I just say, I did own that this was looking about as prescient as David Icke in a subsequent column. That doesn't make a difference to the lefties on X, by the way, formerly known as Twitter, who keep on abusing me with this column. And I say, you're late to the party because I've already disowned this column. I've disowned this column as quickly as I wrote it. I just want to reiterate, this was before D-Day and it was before the resurgence of Farage.
yes, when the facts change, Camilla, so do
indeed.
columnists, always correctly. Thank you so much, Ben and Dom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Love Ben and Dom. They are so brilliant. Now, Camilla, do you remember the youthquake of 2017 that almost put Jeremy Corbyn on the brink of power?
That was when Jezza couldn't have been sexier to the youth of yesterday.
He almost did for Theresa May, and certainly ate into her poll lead, which caused lots and lots of ructions, which we may still be seeing the effects of today. We're going to look a little bit at the 18 to 25s of today, and are they the same as they were back in those heady days of 2017? When Georgia Cohen, one of our brilliant producers, did the research into 18 to 24s in the polls, I thought it had been mistyped.
Yes.
As I read down the list, I got to the Conservatives and it says 8%.
Yes.
And I thought that can't be right, but it is absolutely right. Georgia, of course, always accurate. Labour on 57%, the Greens on 14%, Lib Dems on 10%, and the Conservatives on 8%. Still 2 points ahead of Reform. It's always good to see that the Conservatives are always battling it out with Reform. Reform on 6%. And if we do go back to 2019, the last election, the Conservatives there were on 21%. Now, the Conservative support amongst young people, fine. It may not be very vital for this election, given that Labour is a long way ahead. But if you go back to the 1980s, and when my generation, or slightly before my generation, were young, the Conservatives would be neck and neck with Labour.
Yes.
And over the years, the Conservatives have failed to modernise the Conservative message to young people about why it is that they should vote for the Conservative option. And it does get back, Camilla, to this discussion about, and I said, I think yesterday, centrist possibly is the wrong word, and I did use it in my column. It needs to be a broader offer across demography, across the geography of the UK, than I think Nigel Farage. I don't want to get back into that, but I think that's the other point I do want to add to the argument, that they've lost a generation.
Well, I think the assumption on the right is that that's going to mean that there's a Labour government for time in memoriam. They're saying that that will lead to a blue wipeout, with the map literally resembling some kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But having said that, we can't have it both ways. There's been a massive dialogue on the right about the future of politics, and we're not emboldening younger people to stand up for what they believe in. And we need new talent to come into politics, and who'd want to be an MP these days? So I've always got admiration for people who are willing, ready and able to stand. And I think particularly young people, because it's not an easy life and politicians get so much flack, good for them for standing up for what they believe in. I often say to young people, if I go into schools and universities, there's a difference between being opinionated and informed. If we've got informed, enlivened, engaged people who want to help their local communities, I mean, funnily enough, that's in the spirit of Rishi Sunak's National Service Pledge. So it's no bad thing. But what I'm saying is we can't just have that youth quake happening on the left. The right have got to be empowering young people to believe in the alternative narrative. They've got to be selling it to that generation, and they've got to be providing an alternative dialogue. We can't just have the whole of the younger generation sort of in an echo chamber, not hearing an alternative view and thinking, actually, I'd like to approach things differently.
After the break, we're going to the football. Camilla, I believe there may be something else going on that's not the election, called football.
Oh, the Soche, the soccer. Wonderful. And we're delighted to introduce to the Daily Tea audience Tom Gibbs, our senior sports writer, who's going to have the very difficult job, Kamal, of following the England team around Germany for this wonderful feast of football.
Yeah, what a treat. What's not to like?
Do you call this working for a living, Tom?
Well, I'm actually off to do some breakdancing this afternoon.
Right.
For a non-football related piece, but breakdancing, of course, is in the Olympics this year. So
it
certainly beats working, doesn't it?
Well, we look forward to seeing that footage. We're going to have some fun with the Euros, aren't we, Kamal? Because we thought, how do we introduce this subject? Tom's going to be with us throughout the tournament to give us updates on, what's happening up front and what's happening backstage, and the urinals and people taking their shirts off and putting them around their heads.
The third thing people think about when they think of football, the urinals.
I often think of the urinals. I don't know why.
Yes. We're not going to be the place for, England 2, Slovakia 1, whatever it might be. Is Slovakia in the tournament?
Yes, Slovakia very much in the tournament, yes.
Great.
Didn't want a Rishi Sunak moment there.
No.
We're not going to be the place for the results, but Tom, yes, you're going to be our man on the road. possibly usually for England, but obviously Scotland are there as well, one of the home nations also represented. So we're going to be following not just the football games themselves, but also the fans, some of the maybe news stories that happen. Some things will be serious. Obviously, there's already discussions about dangers around hooliganism. We'll be looking at all the different trends, Tom. Tell us a bit about your journey and where you're going to be going and where you're going to be based initially.
I'm going to be based in Dusseldorf for the majority of the tournament. There are 4 venues very close to Dusseldorf, which are Dortmund, Gelsenkirchen and Cologne, all within striking distance. But the tournament's spread across all of Germany. It goes as far east as Berlin and Leipzig in the southeast of the country as well. But yeah, I'll go where the news takes me.
Go where Gareth Southgate's knitwear takes you, which we will be keeping a close eye on, particularly you, Kamal.
Tom, we have covered men and their knitwear issues on this podcast. But Tom, it's going to be brilliant to have you as one of the team. And you actually, Tom, came up with what we like to describe on the Daily Tea as a funny idea, which was linking the soccer. Camilla's face now is, for those on audio, Camilla's face is slightly dropped now that I've said something is funny, which there, of course, now may not be.
No, it is funny. It is. I'm looking forward to it.
But Tom, tell us your funny idea.
Well, I thought, given that politics is so often keen to borrow the language of football, we can return the favour and think about some political terms that we're all hearing a lot about in the election at the moment and apply them to football.
Great.
I've got 5 for you. Should we start
Go.
Should we start with exit poll?
Yes.
We all understand an exit poll. I think the important thing to remember in the football context is not to get too carried away with the exit poll. And of course, I'm talking about England's first game on Sunday. We're playing Serbia. You shouldn't say we, actually, covering England. That's a big no-no, so let's try to move past that. But Serbia might be quite tricky for England. They're going to be big, strong boys. They always are, but they've got Alexander Mitrovic up front, who was once with Fulham, very tall striker, now playing in Saudi Arabia. England have lost Harry Maguire, beloved from tournaments past with an injury, who's that big presence in defence who might normally have the job of dealing with the extremely tall striker. He's not there, so that could be a problem. The England team looks a little bit unsettled at the moment. There's no first choice left back at the moment, no recognised left back, so Luke Shaw, who's gone with the team, isn't going to start that first game. It will probably be Kieran Trippier playing slightly out of position there, and then there's a little bit of uncertainty in midfield as well. But the important thing about group stage games in tournaments is not to lose them, and Gareth Southgate has done that very, very well. And the last few tournaments that England have been in, there has always been a dud in the group stage. We did lose to Belgium in Gareth Southgate's first tournament in the World Cup in 2018. There was a very dreary draw with Scotland at Wembley on a Friday night at Euro 2021, and of course another extremely tedious 0 draw with America in Qatar at the last World Cup. None of those were fatal to England's chances, so let's not panic too much if the initial signs from England on Sunday are not very positive.
We can finish third and still go through, correct?
That's right, yeah. It's a bloated tournament these days.
Do you like that knowledge? Yeah, thank you.
But I'm
it's
not one of
because
those.
Tom told me earlier.
I'm not one of those patronising people that think that people, may or may not know about sport until I've heard from them. And Camilla, I know that you are expert in football.
I wouldn't say expert, but I know a little bit about it. That's
so go on then
excellent.
to the exit poll. So what are the other very funny connections with the election that you put together?
Yeah, always good when you need to signpost the humour several times before it happens. Turnout, I think, is the second thing we need to think about. And millions will be travelling to Germany this summer from all across Europe. I think you can make the argument that this is the first proper international football tournament we've had since 2016. Certainly for how it appeals to fans, because there was the Russia World Cup, which even in 2018 was not necessarily an appealing place for fans to travel to en masse. The COVID-blighted Euros that were supposed to be 2020 and ended up in 2021 spread all around the continent. A lot of games with very reduced attendance, so didn't really feel right. And of course the Qatar World Cup in 2022, which was deeply odd on a number of levels, not least it was taking place in December. So there's been 2.7 million tickets available for this Euros, a good number of them sold, even for Slovenia versus Denmark. And some of the numbers you will see connected to some of the countries who've not been at a tournament for some time are quite impressive. I think there are 200,000 Scots expected to travel, which is about 4% of their population, which sounds punchy, but
impressive.
Not massively surprising, given they haven't had a tournament like this to go to since France '98 in the World Cup. They were in the last Euros, but their games were all at Wembley and Hampden Park in Glasgow, so they've not really had an opportunity like this to go and enjoy the hospitality and indeed medium strength German beers, as they will, I'm sure, this summer. And it really depends on your level of optimism or pessimism and how you might feel about football fans, about how you think that's going to go. I mean, I think there's a good argument that it could be quite a tricky summer in a lot of ways. I think we saw certainly in the last Euros final at Wembley, there is still a lot of pent-up aggression. People are still, I think, coming out of that, and football fans especially are still relishing all being together again and sometimes not behaving as they should do. So it could be slightly horrible in that respect. We could see...
There's an echo here. Angry Tories, angry football fans. Could it be a summer of discontent?
But actually, Tom, as well, a lot of that was all around just very, very bad security and management of crowds, that people could get through the gates at different times without ticketless fans being everywhere. How are they going to handle all that kind of issue?
Yeah, they vastly underestimated that at Wembley, and you would expect the German team behind this tournament and all the regional policing operations will be much more sure-footed with all of that. Certainly at international tournaments I've been to in the past, that security, where you can go, how close you can get to a stadium, is much more regulated. But it remains to be seen how it works in the city centres. You can't, you cannot expect a policing operation to cover a huge city, as we saw in Marseille in the last Euros or the last. True Euros, which were hosted by one country in France in 2016, where the Russian fans were attacking England fans all across the city. It's very, very difficult to prevent that sort of thing from happening. There will always be a determined small minority of people going to these things to cause trouble. But
turnout high. We're concluding
turnout high.
Going to be
Absolutely.
What are the
Absolutely.
marginals? What are the marginals, Tom?
The marginals, well, I think you've got to look at the group of death. This tournament has provided us a traditional group of death, which is Spain, Italy, Croatia, Albania. It's going to be tight, this group. You could end up with a giant knocked out before the knockout round in the Ed Balls 2015 role. I always get frustrated when you see people pick through the tournament and they just pick the favourites in each group. It never, ever works out like that. And this Euros, as you say, Camilla, the teams in third can go through. You have got to be going some to get eliminated at the group stage. But there will be shocks. There always are. I quite like Albania getting through this group, as that's my sort of slightly left field tip. And I think you could see some sadness amongst one of those giants.
I've got Italy in the Daily Tea sweepstake. Who have you got?
I have the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
So
not bad.
Neither
Solid
of
choices.
those bad.
Don't you agree,
Albania,
Tom?
really dark horse. They're the sort of maybe the Nigel Farage of the Euros, in that they may come up, unseen by some of the favourites.
Absolutely. Well, we can absolutely move on to talking about Nigel Farage and seasoned campaigners in general at the Euros. I mean, I think probably not for the first time I'm going to compare Nigel Farage to Cristiano Ronaldo in that he is about to play.
Wow.
Probably the first time in our discussion, but yes,
certainly the first time in Daily Tea history. He's 39, Cristiano Ronaldo. He's about to start. He probably won't start for Portugal, but he certainly will feature for Portugal. His 6th European Championship for his country, which is quite a baffling record. Probably never going to be bettered. So he's always involved, but he rarely gets the outcome he wants. They did win it in 2016, but he wasn't on the pitch at the time, which would have eaten him up inside. So there's the Farage connection. Always involved, always a presence, perhaps not quite sealing the deal. And he'll be alongside Pepe for Portugal as well. He's 41, and I think there is something comforting in having a player at a tournament slightly younger than yourself, so slightly older than yourself. So I still feel like I've got a chance.
That ship has sailed for me, sadly, but for you two, of course, that is a very good thing.
Great stuff. And there was a final category, wasn't there?
The Red Wall, yes.
Yes, let's talk about the Red Wall in the Euros.
We must. There usually is a yellow wall at the stadium of Borussia Dortmund, which is well known as one of the most attractive stadium for ground hoppers and people looking for a lovely stag weekend in European football at Dortmund. There are 13 of the 48 new football kits being worn at this tournament are red, so we're going to see a lot of red on the stands, and this does give us a chance to talk about the most important thing at the Euros, which is, of course, the football kit.
Of course.
There's too much red, in my opinion. I think I'm a fan of slightly more exciting colour combinations. Some are okay. Belgium are in a deep, soulful red for this tournament. Denmark have got this kit that looks a little bit like the sort of thing you'd find in the early 90s. It's quite shiny and polyestery.
Nylon,
yeah, a little bit sweaty to wear. Some of the Reds far less sure. Croatia famously wear kind of red and white checks. They've got huge, big checks the size of sort of 7-inch records on their shirt this year, which I'm not into at all. No, Turkey have got an all-red kit, quite boring. Romania's got this kind of scandalous plunging collar, which is not really suitable for family audiences. But we are going to see a lot of fans in red and that yellow wall of Dortmund.
What are England
transformed.
wearing? Because we associate them with red and white.
Yes, well, the red
And
is
a bit of
gone
blue.
for this tournament. They're in an unusual purple away shirt, but they haven't worn their away kit at a tournament
And
since
then there was the
2018.
furore over the flag being a bit kind of rainbowish.
Yes,
There
doesn't
was-
quite look like a Union flag.
No, they
created some fury.
They riffed on the St George's cross on the back of the home shirt, which seemed to really upset people this
Yes.
time.
I know it upset you a lot, Kamal. No, it upset me a lot more. I need to get over it. Tom, get thee gone to Dusseldorf. You must go. You've got lots of preparation to do for this mammoth task ahead. And we very much look forward to you getting back in touch with us when anything significant happens with that round ball.
And let's hope that England and Scotland get beyond the round of 16, which means it will extend beyond the election campaign, and that will be a great thing. You can come back and do some more funny jokes on something completely different, a different theme.
I look
which we'll have
forward to it.
find.